Good evening, everyone. Welcome to Book Passage. We're so happy to have you. My name is Cheryl Bronstein. I am one of the event coordinators here at Book Passage, and I'm very happy to host you this evening and to welcome you to our virtual event. We have a lot of exciting programming up with our conversations with authors. And thank you so much to all of our loyal supporters who are out there listening and who come and shop in our store, both in store and online. We are very grateful for your business, and you've really helped us to keep our doors open these past 2 years. Book Passage is very proud of our 2 locations. We have our store in Corte Madera and our beautiful location in the San Francisco Ferry Building. Both stores are open for in-person shopping, so please come in, say hello, and shop at our beautiful locations. Also, for all you business owners out there, Book Passage has a very active and thriving business-to-business operation. We call it our corporate orders program. And we all know books make a wonderful gift. So if you would like to gift books to your clients or your staff, please give us a call. We know that books are, not only do they make a great gift, but with our remote workers, it's really nice for the companies to have everybody reading the same book. It is a very unifying force. So corporate orders, just give us a call. We can process your order with great customer service, attention, and we can offer very attractive discounts. If this interests you, give one of our stores a call. Book Passage is proud to bring you this excellent programming. So please take a look at our website for up-to-date events. In addition to these many online offerings that we have, we are now starting to host, again, in-person events. That's right, back in the store and at various locations around the Bay Area, we are having authors come in person. It's things that cannot be missed. Some of the events we have coming up, I want to mention we have Bob Odenkirk in person at the Palace of Fine Arts on Tuesday, March 8th. He will be discussing his memoir, Comedy, 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 Drama. We also have Eric Larson. His new book, his Splendid in the Vial, is coming out in paperback, and he will be in our Corte Madera store in early March. So check out our calendar. You do not want to miss any of these wonderful author events and classes, both in person, virtual. So here at Book Passage, our mission is to enrich, engage, and inspire. And Book Passage has been a Bay Area institution for over 40 years. Thank you again to all our customers and supporters out there. We hope to continue serving you for another 40 years. Now, this is a great book tonight. And it recalls, I don't know if you all remember that scene from Sex and the City where Miranda asks her friends to decipher and analyze a message left on her answering machine from one of her dates. She plays the message and she's awfully puzzled. Does he like me? Is he breaking up with me? What does it mean? Well, Mimi Winsberg's Speaking in Thumbs is the modern day relationship text translator. This new book is an entertaining, essential, and ultimately a practical guide for anyone navigating the most vexing feature of the modern romance, the text message. By analyzing texts from entire life cycle of romance, the initial exchanges to the gulf-wrenching end of relationship goodbyes, Winsberg empowers readers to understand both themselves and the people on the other end of the text message. Mimi Winsberg is a Stanford-trained psychiatrist with 25 years of clinical experience. Winsberg appears regularly on Good Morning America, and her work has been featured in GQ, Glamour, Bloomberg, Business Week, Business Insider. I could go on and on. She has a BA in neuroscience from Harvard. Speaking in Thumbs is her first book, and we are so thrilled to have it available for sale at Book Passage. Tonight, Mimi is joined by Eve Rodsky. Eve's New York Times bestselling book, Fair Play, is a gamified life management system that helps partners rebalance their domestic workload and reimagine their relationships. It was a Reese Book Club pick, and her new book, Your Unicorn, Space, Reclaim Your Creative Life in a Too Busy World, explores the cross-section between the science of creativity, productivity, and resilience. This book is also available at Book Passage. Eve lives in Los Angeles with her husband and 3 children, and we are so pleased she is joining us this evening. So let's get some decoding on those relationship texts with a warm welcome to our authors, Dr. Mimi Winsberg and Eve Rodsky.
Wow, Cheryl, what a beautiful intro. Thank you. Welcome, Mimi. And I cannot wait when I'm in San Francisco. I'm going straight to Book Passage in the Ferry Building. So thank you for being open again. Mimi, so you have a lot of stuff going on in your life. You know, I could read your bio on and on and on, but really you're a co-founder of a tech startup. You're speaking everywhere, robust researcher, clinician over your lifetime. Why add author to all of those accolades?
Well, first, thanks so much for having me here, and it's a pleasure to get to chat with you, Eve. Have been a big fan. As to why I wrote the book, it was one of those things that just sort of had to be done because I found myself at this particular intersection, and it was the intersection really of my professional and personal worlds colliding. So professionally, as you said, I'd been working at the forefront of digital mental health, and I've been developing tools really to understand behavioral traits and even identify early signs of illness in things like questionnaire responses and text messages. We were looking to see, could a text actually identify whether someone was depressed or even suicidal? Could it predict risk? I also was serving as the on-site psychiatrist at Facebook, and there I was taking care of the employees. And these people are, of course, the digerati, the inventors of the algorithm. They were the masters of the digital world, and yet still in my sessions, I would get handed a phone and be asked, what does this text mean? How should I respond to this? And so it clearly was a conundrum. At the same time, just before I took the job working at the Facebook clinic, my marriage ended. My husband and I decided to part ways. And so I found myself on dating apps, engaging with people, swiping, texting. And I joked that I could make a psychiatric diagnosis in less than 20 texts. And I even sort of made a game of it at times where, I'd chat with somebody, go to meet them and sort of see if my hunches were correct. And I found that it was kind of a hobby, but it kind of became a career. And then I thought, well, there's got to be a book in this. And so I wrote it. And I really hope what the book can do is take some of the anxiety out of this process, because romance is, of course, one of the great joys of life. It's really fun. And it's a shame in some ways that we have all this anxiety with what is actually a very new language. I mean, we've only been texting since 2007. And yet now it's the predominant language in our romantic relationships. I mean, it's the lingua franca of love. And so really our brains are just catching up to this new language. And I really hope that I could shed some light on that.
Well, what's interesting is it feels very old because it has a return to the letter writing days. I remember I found all these letters that I'd written to college boyfriends, but it also, it's very new because, it's a new form of asynchronous communication, whereas a lot of people think of communication as a synchronous thing, like what we're doing tonight together. So can you talk a little bit about what is the difference between synchronous language and asynchronous language, and how does that affect communication? Because like you said, this is a new and old form. I mean, it's new since 2007, but it has a similar thing to letter writing or like that answering machine. But I love it so much because what you actually do is, again, not giving up the book, everyone needs to buy it, but you come in and you actually lay out different people's text exchange, and for different reasons, you are able to analyze them. But I'm curious, as somebody who looks at communication as a practice, how does this practice differ from synchronous communication when people are talking directly to each other?
Yeah, well, I think what's interesting is that asynchronous has replaced synchronous communication in so many ways. And one of the things that became obvious as I started looking at these text messages, and I solicited text messages from really everybody I knew, and they came flooding in.
So good.
What I noticed is that we're having really important conversations over text. We're meeting people for the first time over text, and we're, getting to know them that way and actually deciding whether to meet them based on the text exchange. So it's sort of like the job interview, happens over text romantically. And then even well into marriage, people are having pretty profound conversations over text. And so that sort of became obvious that it was something that was happening through the life cycle of a relationship, and that a lot of conversation that we wouldn't have dreamed, 10 years ago of having over text are now happening that way. And, I think with it comes possibility and also risk. There's risk of misinterpretation, but there is the possibility of using it to your advantage. And, that these are some of the things, of course, that I address in the book, but like, to begin with, we have objectivity initially when we're texting with somebody. It's this opportunity, before you get so caught up in how they smell and making out with them and, all the things, all the rabbit hole that you go down when the chemicals take over and you lose all objectivity. Here you can actually look at the way they're using language, and there are really clues in their language as to who they are. And those things may end up being really important down the line. And so I think being able to sort of spot those early on is really interesting. Farther into a relationship, I think we can start to spot things like compatibility and even how are we fighting? How are we discussing things? What can we notice in the text messages that can allow us to learn from ourselves and learn about our pair bonds?
Before I go into some more of my questions, what did you learn about your own texting style? Because you must have, you talk a little bit about that in the book too. And you definitely are at the intersection of research and these beautiful anecdotes. They're more than anecdotes. But I'm just curious, what did you learn did you learn anything about yourself while analyzing other people's texts?
Definitely. And of course, writing this book involved an archaeologic dig of my own text messages. And so I did notice things. I think one thing I try to teach people is how to interview someone essentially, over text, how to not interview them, but like bring out their true selves in a conversation. So, instead of just saying, how was your weekend? Or, what did you do today? You really can bring out people's true selves by using a lot of the techniques that we use as therapists or as psychiatrists of mirroring people and picking something small and expanding on it. And so I give people techniques on how to do that in a text message. And so I was able to see, some of the techniques I use in action in reviewing them. But of course, I was also able to see how I was processing difficult emotional conversations over text and notice inflection points in a relationship where things had deepened or things had grown apart.
I think that's really important because I have a friend, Greg McEwen, who writes a lot of books. He wrote a book called Essentialism, and he thinks in that book, stripping down to the essentials are really about being understood. And I wonder, do you think that asynchronous communication, our new form of communication, speaking in thumbs, do you think there's more of a recipe without your book? Do you think there's more of a recipe to be misunderstood?
Absolutely. I think there is what we're doing with a text message is we're taking a small amount of information and expanding it. And as I say in the book, our brains are storytelling machines. As humans, that's what we do. We tell stories about the world around us. We tell stories about ourselves. We tell stories about the people we're interacting with. And sometimes those stories are true and sometimes they're distorted. And, when you're looking at an individual text message or even a train of text messages between yourself and somebody else, you're telling a story in your head, and it may be a very different story than the one that they're telling. And pausing and looking for signs can be a very helpful way to expand the story you're telling, or notice how the story you're telling may be a little bit distorted and may need adjustment. We may need to tell a new story, either about ourselves or about the person we're talking with.
What I love about this book is it gives you two different distinct skill sets. It gives you a sense of how to analyze your own communication, text communication as a practice. And it also helps you analyze other people's, which is equally as important, but a different skill set. And I felt like I was learning two different things. So since this book, it's really beautifully research-based. And what I love about it is I feel like I don't ever need to read another Gottman article or anything relationship, love languages, nothing. You really can, they're all sort of distilled in here. So chock full of research, obviously chock full of people's real life problems and anecdotes that you analyze. So from either side, either the research or the anecdotes, what's been most surprising? What was the most surprising, or give me the top two most surprising things you learned in writing the book?
There were a couple of research studies that I came across that I thought were surprising. One that I would say was even shocking was this study that Timothy Wilson had done, where he'd put people in a room without phones, without pens, paper, no distractions, just a room where they had to sit by themselves with their thoughts for 15 minutes. And people found this very uncomfortable. And then he gave them the choice to do that or to administer shocks to themselves. And a full 67% of men chose to give themselves shocks rather than sit alone with their thoughts. Women did a little better. But, this idea that we are so devoted to our phones these days that it's very hard to break away, that they capture much of our attention, is not a novel idea. But I thought that study was quite shocking. And then I think some of the gender differences that came about in the research, the language of power, how that's different in men and women, and probably quite biologically based, because it actually changes when you give somebody testosterone, that like men tend to use more articles in their messages. And, if you give a woman testosterone, she does it too. So it's quite interesting, some of the gender differences in language. But I would say the overall thing that I took away was the depth of communication that's happening through this medium. I mean, these texts that I would sift through, they were powerful, really like romantic and stirring in many ways, and heartbreaking, and that there was this written record of these things, and that this is how the conversations were taking place.
I think there are so many fascinating things. I also thought it was fascinating that the more you reveal of yourself, may not always be the best thing if you're interested in courtship. And so I wanted to actually dig in a little bit about the flow of the book, how it works, because you have three really important pieces. You have sort of swiping, syncing, and scrolling, and they're all different. But I really wanted to start with the beginning, which is swiping. And then that was where I learned about the being misunderstood. It's also where one of my favorite text exchanges was the woman who said, "Do you want to grab coffee?" And the person responded, and she said, we'll do it at noon. And he's like, "Well, that's a weird time to have coffee." And so it felt very misunderstood, or like you said, rigidity was abound in that text exchange. So the beginning, the syncing, again, really applied to me, and I was very excited about it. I want to talk more about the deeper relationships, but swiping, can you just tell us best practices? What do you think in those first three chapters, again, should people know?
Well, I think the first thing I emphasize is really knowing yourself, because when people are interviewed and asked, what are you looking for in a partner, they'll give you a list, a checkbox, essentially, and then they swipe on entirely different things that don't match their checklist whatsoever, right? And so we obviously feel two poles. We think we know what we want, and then we behave in a different way. And the question is,
that's important, by the way. I hope everyone's listening to that.
Well, what's the true north? Which one is really important? Is it what we say we want, or is it how we act? And so I think I encourage readers to explore that. And I actually give some case studies, to help kind of frame some of those questions for people about what might be important. Because so often in my office, I've seen people come in and they keep saying they want one thing and they keep doing something else. And of course, that that's a learning process in the therapy journey. what else to think about with swiping? Well, sort of back to this notion of objectivity, that it's this opportunity. You have this opportunity early in a relationship to look for key signals in a person. And once we get deep into the story of the relationship and the story of the we and our, the journey that we're on together, once those two I's become a we lose that objectivity. Mm-hmm. And so there's this opportunity and that's what I emphasize in the first third of the book, to really look for, well, what word choice is this person using? What does that betray about their personality? What kind of big 5 personality traits do they have? Can we see their attachment style in their text messages? The answer is yes, there is evidence of all of this. Can we see what kind of humor they use? Is there something mean-spirited about the way they're bantering? And what do their emojis say about them? Their use of them, non-use of them, or which ones they use? All of these things are clues as to who you're talking to. And I think this stuff is important to pay attention to. Like, the details matter. Punctuation matters. So I give readers a lot of clues as to look to what they're dealing with. And it all really boils down to this notion of thin slicing, that if you have a trained eye, and this is what we teach in medicine, of course, is like, how do you get a quick pattern recognition with a small data set? You look at an image, oh, I've seen that X-ray 1 million times before, it means this. And so what I do is I teach the reader, how do you distill what is a lot of information and thin slice it and draw some conclusions. And, those won't always be 100% accurate, but can serve as a GPS. I think by providing all these examples of text messages in there too, it's this window into how other people talk and how other people conduct their relationships. And I get to see that as a psychiatrist all the time, every day, but I wanted people to have that kind of GPS of where, how are these conversations taking place? What can we see? What do we look for?
Well, I found the thin slicing idea was fascinating. I wonder if is that from like a cell and or a microscope? I didn't know where that term came from.
It's a good question. I think that it could certainly be from that. I mean, I think of it almost as a sort of radiologic image, but I'm the daughter of a radiologist, right. So maybe that's my bias. but yeah, I think
like a microscope of like a thin cell.
Yeah, you're taking a slice of what is a large data set, and you are you're kind of taking the slice and filling in the 3-dimensional picture from the slice. And that's a dangerous thing to do, but if you're trained, it's a valuable thing to do.
Well, yeah, and that's what this book does. Again, we're speaking about speaking in thumbs, and it's really, the thin slicing was fascinating. And that brought me to a question. I was telling my mother about your book, and she said, well, it sounds like your grandmother, who used to always say, well, it never gets better than a first date. So that's my question to you. We're still in the first part of the book. Does it ever get better than a first text?
Well, I certainly hope so. I think that it's kind of a little sad if it doesn't get better than a first date. And I talk about how relationships can really be a process of illusionment rather than disillusionment. I don't think what we want.
I thought that was so empowering, by the way. Really very beautiful.
Yeah, that we want to kind of have the process of continuing to get to know the person be a deepening of affection and over time. And, of course, you're filling in as you go, but there's a deepening that's happening in the process, not a wearing off of that initial lust or fantasy that you have about them.
I love that. Okay, so let's get to my favorite part of the book, which is the middle section, because I think it relates a lot to fair play, about understanding. I love peace, love, and understanding. So let me go to a few things there that I wanted to ask you. I thought it was really fun to look at the love languages of text. So, I think a lot of people talk about love languages, or as I saw in my data, most women's love language is an act of service. And it was like a hierarchy, a pyramid. Like if you told me you get gifts for your act of service, that meant your partner was already somebody who was taking the garbage out, or commuting your child to school. So I was always laughing about love languages, but I think it was really nice because the love languages are different. They're different on text. And so I was hoping that you would talk a little bit about Riffing was really fun for me to read about.
That's
It's
my
compliment-
love language
Yeah,
is
yeah, I was
riffing.
gonna
Yeah.
say riffing was great because I was thinking that that is definitely one that I found really, that banter was awesome. So, but can you talk a little bit about how they correlate? Because that was one of my favorite parts of the book, your
Yeah.
redefining of love languages.
Right, right. Well, so Gary Chapman has the love languages, of course, and it's been such a popular book year after year. I think a lot of people know it and a lot of people talk about it. Many,
Yes.
my patients come in and talk about how what they know their own love languages. And so I tried to come up with a corollary over text. And, the compliment certainly has words of affirmation is a compliment over text. And so I explore that and sort of what's the best way to give a compliment, if you're a man or even if you're a woman, but what is the best way to compliment over text and who might enjoy that? And then riffing, of course, is the love language. That's just when you sort of feel like sitting down and shooting this, having a quick conversation about nothing. And it's usually funny and it kind of engages that creative part of your brain where it's almost like improv, and you're having fun with words and you're playing off of each other's words. And to me, that's the equivalent of quality time. So, because it's really like you're really paying attention to the other person and you're setting aside other demands, other tasks that you might need just to really get into their language together. And so that's one language. Spoon feeding is another language I talk about. And, that's of course the person that's like, here's what I had for lunch. Here's the park where I'm going for a walk. Here's a picture of my dog, chasing a ball, and constant updates throughout the day. And some people love this. They feel like if their partner's doing this for them or they can do it for their partner, that's a sign of a really great relationship. Whereas other people might feel like, you're kind of using me as your personal Facebook page right now. So another one, of course, is the acts of service, which I translate into nudging. That's like, hey, don't forget to, I'm reminding you, and, kind of being, or what are you doing right now?
Go to the doctor. Yes.
Yeah, that's the acts of service equivalent. And then I think, the touch equivalent, I would say is, I call it nooking, but it's any kind of like physical affection delivered over text all the way to sexting. And that, of course, is a way people really find intimacy, digitally and even, it can bridge the gap when you're not with the person. So it can be a nice way to connect.
I love that. And it's a really fun part to think about your text love language. If you have a text love language, share it with us in the chat and we'll get that from you. So that'll be really fun. But you also get, this book is, I would say to people, it's really a relationships book. It's a combination of, to me, of relationships and communication, both two really hard topics to tackle. And you do it through this medium of speaking in thumbs, but it's really very deep in terms of things that you tackle. One of them is attunement. And I think when you think about attachment, attunement, a lot of people, or we've been conditioned just to hear that the first time with parenting, be attuned to your child. We sort of, every time I hear attachment, now I get like PTSD because I think I have to stay in my child's bed for 2 years. So, but attunement, attachment, these are important, long studied concepts of how humans relate. You're an expert in human relations. So even outside of the text format, can you just talk a little bit about what makes for good human relationships? I know that's a very big question and it wasn't on my approved list probably, but
no, I think it's a great question. And
but it's important.
It's when I turn to, the experts that I've relied on in my clinical work over the years. I mean, namely, John Gottman, Sue Johnson, who developed emotionally focused therapy, Esther Perel. And so, I looked to these experts as I wrote the book to figure out what is the language of attunement over text and how can we demonstrate that? And, I really think it boils down to, I would say, a few things. Paying attention really to exactly what the person is saying in their language. But curiosity and respect and generosity, I think, really are sort of the foundations of that kind of attunement. So really seeking to understand about the person, and then respecting and accepting them for where they are, and then doing your best to sort of bring your best self to the table. And I think that does boil down to generosity at times, of kind of taking the most generous interpretation of something, or offering a listening ear when it's needed, turning toward the concept of turning toward that Gottman is one of the T's in attune in his acronym, and so I think those are all really important things that we do demonstrate over text. And you can ignore somebody over text, and you cannot listen to them. And I think there are ways to meet people with more curiosity, more acceptance, and more generosity in our digital conversations. And I would say this is true in romance, and it's even true in the workplace. Where when we're rushed and we're all guilty of it, right? Of going too fast and not taking the time to exercise these muscles.
Well, thank you for that. And we're going to talk about the workplace, because I was taking a lot of notes actually from this book that I think could be applied to non-romantic work colleagues and work relationships, and we'll get there. But I'm getting some questions from my Fair Play audience. I thought this was a good one. And the question is, on text, I'll paraphrase it. On text, you don't have active listening, you don't have body language. And this person is saying that they were told in their management trainings that listening and body language were like 80% of communication. So what happens when you lose those other clues that are not just the verbal? I thought that was a good question.
Yeah, it's a great question. And I actually addressed it in the book, because, what we do when we're paying attention in person is we use body language, right. we tune into the person, and we can do the same thing over text, and we actually do it unconsciously. And there's a researcher who I relied quite a lot on for the book and interviewed, James Penbaker, who's at the University of Texas. And he studied this notion of language style matching, and how we unconsciously language style match when we're paying attention. And this means we start to use, it's actually not like the nouns in our language, but it's the little words. It's the little words like articles, pronouns, the way we use thes, withs, I's, use can really end up affecting how we're paying attention. And we do it unconsciously. It's a very hard thing to fake, but people notice it, and you can notice it if you're paying attention. So you're able to look at an exchange and say, do I really have this person's attention? Are they language style matching? And it can be actually a really interesting sign of, chemistry and compatibility in a romantic relationship. But I think it probably also manifests in the workplace too. I didn't study that for the book, but I think that it's an interesting idea. It ties a lot into the language of power, and that I think is something we do see, is that somebody who's in a position of power is likely to say we, whereas somebody who feels a little weaker and less powerful is going to use the I. And because think about it, the CEO is paying attention to the we, and the lower employee is worried more about themselves. And we see the same thing in romantic relationships, where the person who might hold the reins a little bit more in the relationship might use a different set of pronouns than the person who doesn't hold the reins. And they might phrase their statements and questions differently. So we can actually see power gradients in a relationship, which is such an important relationship dynamic. And so I discussed that in the book too, of like, how do you notice what the power gradient is in your relationship?
Well, yeah, I mean, that was fascinating, because obviously there's a lot of power dynamics in relationships, and being able to analyze it from this asynchronous way was really, really, really important. So, okay, I have more questions that I want to ask before, and then I can go back to the questions on, but this is the next one. The peace, love, and understanding was one of also my favorite chapters. You have a lot of, again, it's just chock full of research. And I wanted to know, to you, when you look at that, that level of understanding, back to the opposite of being misunderstood, as Craig McEwen said, what is important in terms of somebody in a practice of communication feeling consistently understood? I know there's a lot about language matching, but I think it's just interesting that we have these long-standing relationships. I think about my relationship with my kids or my partner, where our text chains are like 3 or 4 years long. And so what does it look like if it's transactional versus this? If you think of, I'm going to have hopefully a text chain with Seth that lasts for 10 years. What happens if you're aiming for peace, love, and understanding over a long period of time with asynchronous communication, does that look different than if it's more transactional?
Yeah, I mean, certainly in one of the studies that I quoted in the book, a woman took her text exchanges from first date through to, I think, 7 years of marriage,
So cool.
and did a word cloud of all she did a word cloud of all the words that were in their text exchange. And it was interesting how, at the beginning, it started out with, date, love, all these things. And then it got to dinner now, got very practical the farther they got into marriage. And of course, some of that is absolutely normal. And how could it not be? And so I would say, back to the thin slicing idea that when you're looking for this peace, love, and understanding, you want to look for trends and not 7 years into a relationship, pick, an isolated set of texts about grocery shopping and draw large conclusions from it. But when you are having those, more meaningful conversations, is there a sense of paying attention and, curiosity again, respect? Do you see trends that way, or do you see a kind of ignoring or maybe criticism, contempt? Some of the more toxic languages I discuss in the book, stonewalling, which is just to say, I didn't hear that. You don't say I didn't hear that. You just act like you didn't hear it. And that might be not responding, or it might be not responding to the question the person's asked. And, so we can look for trends like these, what Gottman refers to as the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse over text. And then we can look for what I talk about as the 4 good practices to use over text that can lend themselves to more empathy, and more respect in relationships.
Okay, well, before we go into toxic texting, which was a little voyeuristic for me and fun, that part of the book, I want to just take a second and say, if you're on YouTube with us, thank you for being here. Thank you for supporting Book Passage. You can, again, pick up Speaking in Thumbs there. And we want to hear from you. Do you have questions? The way we'll get them, because we're in the webinar format, is you can put them in the YouTube chat. And then the amazing Book Passage team will get them to us here on our Zoom. So we would really love your questions. I'm getting some through my my Fair Play Slack. They're also being, because a lot of people were very interested in this book, especially I'd say the people who are dating on my team. Okay, so can we talk a little bit about the 4 horsemen is a concept that's been around for a while, but I thought it was really beautiful. Again, the same way what you did with love languages, applying it to this new important format of Speaking in Thumbs. So not to give away chapter 8, but the toxic texting chapter is fun and interesting and important. So can you just give us a little bit of how the 4 horsemen and toxic texting relate to each other?
Well, look, we've all been there, right? Felt the sort of heat of emotion as we're having a text conversation, and perhaps tried to slow ourselves down, or perhaps our thumbs got the better of us. And so, I look at that, and I look at actually real life conversations that people have, fights people have had over text, or misunderstandings they've had over text. And this is less about not being able to interpret. It's really more about a lot of passion going into these texts, a lot of hurt and a lot of jealousy, perhaps. And I explore all of those sorts of emotions and how those get relayed over text message. And it does boil down to, I think, two things. The first is that we have this opportunity when we're having, let's say, something that resembles more of an argument than, a sweet nothing conversation over text. We have the ability to pause and just say, all right,
yes,
let's emotionally regulate before we reply. And let me think about what this person's really saying. Let me maybe even show this text to somebody before I reply and check my assumptions. And I think that that's the benefit that this asynchronous form offers, is that you can cool your jets a little before responding. I think the second piece of it is that sorry, I lost my train of thought there, but I think the second piece of it is really that we have a written record of our text messages, that, like I say, it's the electronic medical record of our relationships. I don't know if it's a good thing.
They don't go away.
Right. Like, I don't know if it's a good thing or a bad thing. Maybe we're not meant to have a written record of our
they don't go away.
but they are there. And you know what? We can learn from them. We can go back and like look at those messages and just say, was I at my best? Did I make an assumption? Did I use any toxic words? And what I mean by toxic words are just like obvious sources of criticism, or, maybe sarcasm, mean-spirited things. I talk about the different styles of humor, and which are sort of the more elevated ones, which are the ones that are maybe not so great to practice. So, I think you can go back and look at your own. Have you made any toxic remarks? Have you made any assumptions? Have you told a story about the other person that might not really be true? And conversely, what about them? How are they responding? And so by doing that, I really think we can learn. And I think we can learn to communicate better by seeing these records of, and so that's what I do in the books. I show these texts and I say, this is where there's room for improvement. This is where somebody might have been able to respond differently. Ooh, here's an example of somebody who just practiced some serious emotional jujitsu in this text message, and look how they dodged a fight by gracefully responding this way. And it was really interesting to look at the different examples.
Well, why I wanted to be with you tonight is because our work intersects in this idea of communication as a practice. Because what was so fascinating, Mimi, was that I interviewed 1,000 people on social media, and I said, what's your most important practice? And I did that vaguely for fun, because I was hoping that at least one person would say communication. Most people didn't understand the question or said exercise or meditation, but communication is a practice. And what you're talking about, the idea of going back and learning, it's very strange. It would sound very strange to people if communication is a means to an end. But if you look at communication as something that you can practice, you can learn, you can get better at, then of course it makes sense. And that's why I loved your book so much. It assumed that people wanted to learn and get better at communication, which I think is actually a big assumption, because I don't think a lot of people even think about communication as a practice. So thank you for investing the time into teaching us how to make communication a practice, especially in this new art form of a new type of communication. I really, really appreciate that. We had a
I'll just say that even if people don't want to communicate, or they don't have that as a specific goal to want to communicate better, I think they do want to have happy relationships.
Right.
Single people generally want to be partnered up. And I think people who are in partnerships want those to go smoothly. So I think we're all motivated by that.
Exactly. It's like, hey, do you want to live in resentment, criticism, and contentment for the next 20 years? Or would you rather have some fun, playfulness, excitement, right? So that's what this is about. It's about communication is the root of how you choose to be in a relationship. And I thought there was a really beautiful question that came in. And this gets back to what we were asking earlier about, sort of my fear of asynchronous communication, and how, because in my day job, I work for families that look like the HBO show Succession. And I've seen some really things that couldn't be taken back on text. And because it's the written record, I was like, geez, I just wish Dad hadn't said that to son in text, where he can keep using it against him over and over again. So this question was, when would you suggest not using the asynchronous method, and when it's really important to speak to somebody face to face?
I wanted to put a little sidebar in the book of like, here are 10 conversations you should not have over text. And, there are many, right? I think we could all think, honey, I'm pregnant. There are lots of things that probably should just be said in person.
Bye, I'm breaking up with you, never see you again,
Exactly. There's so much to be gained from like being able to hold somebody's hand when you say something, or, give them a hug if they feel upset, or whatever it might be, or just to gauge their response in real time. So I do think there are plenty of conversations where you do want to just say, stop let's do this in person. And I think I give a couple of those examples. I know I give a couple of those examples in the book where that does need to happen. And so being astute about what can be communicated in this medium and what should not be is a really important skill to also have.
I think that's important. That's great. And I think the other beauty of this book is, that power of the pause, this idea, that when emotion is high, cognition is low. And so I was actually thinking of you. I thought you'd be proud of me. This is not a romantic relationship, but I was running late and I had someone coming to pick me up and they were late because the other person was running late. So I was going to unleash against the first person. And then I was like, okay, I'm speaking to me next week. I'm going to pause because I don't want this in written language that I just unloaded on this person. So and then about 10 minutes later, I was really glad that I had paused. So I was thinking about,
we've all had that. We've all had that experience.
But I was thinking about you. So your teachings are already working for me. So we only have a couple more minutes. So I wanted to ask you a little bit about translating this to other formats. Because as I was saying to you, I was writing down different nuggets of information, even in the attachment and attunement section that I think could work with leaders and teams. And so have you had that feedback, or am I the first person giving it to you?
No, I have surprisingly quite a bit of that since people have started reading the book. Yeah. And, it makes me wonder if there's not another book in the works.
I think there is. Speaking in thumbs for work.
Yeah, right. Especially, I think, in the remote work environment when we're all,
it's like
Slack. I live on Slack.
Yeah.
We live on Slack and, we're moving fast and hopefully not breaking anything, but we're moving fast and we're communicating asynchronously all day long about important things. And sometimes, these little small grievances, as I think, as you pointed out in one of your essays, you can get a text that just is the straw that can break the camel's back, right? And so I think
that's why we're here, because of a text.
Right. We do have to be careful. We do. We have to be more careful probably than we think we do. And I think now in this remote work environment, as we're having less in-person time and more asynchronous time, these lessons are all the more important.
I 100% agree. And I do hope we can realize that Slack is not just a means to an end. It's also a place where you can practice empathy and respect and curiosity, and all of really the beautiful lessons that you lay out. So I had a very specific question coming in from my Fair Play audience. And then I want to hear more about your world domination plan and where people can find you. But this was a question saying she's saying her sister is dating, and she won't respond to anybody who puts punctuation into their text messages. Is that a good thing because she's language matching, or is the sister being too rigid? That was just a fun question.
So just so I understand, she won't reply if they punctuate, or she won't reply
exactly.
if they don't.
It sounds like if they put a period in a text.
So I talk about this. There's Dr. Klim did a study on this, looking at the period at the end of the text, and generally people perceive it to be rude. It's considered widely to be rude to put a period, and I think it does the period users. And I have several in my life. I love them, but I have several in my life, and I think they're just they're more, they might be a little bit more old-fashioned in the way they're communicating, and a little clearer in many ways. But I think that your friend's sister needs to pay attention to these small details and think about is what kind of, if she reads my book, she'll get to see what are the personality traits of the period users versus the exclamation point users versus the comma users. And they're all different. Colon users are conscientious, comma users, not so much. So it's the punctuation, it's the little things that do matter, and they do reveal things about our personality traits.
I love that. So if you're out there, I'll respond to you later. Yes, it matters, and don't dismiss it. That's a legitimate concern. And I appreciate that these small things do matter. They're all clues, it sounds like. So since we're at the end of our time, can you talk about sort of your world domination plan? Where will you be on the road? Where are you taking your book, and how people can find you?
Yeah. Well, right now I'm in my house in San Francisco, and I'm not really planning to be on the road given that most things are happening online, but you can find me online, and you can find me on my website at drwinsberg.com. That's drwinsberg.com. And you can follow me on Twitter at mwinsberg, and on Instagram as the text.whisperer. So I think that stay tuned. There'll be more things to come. And also Brightside is a great resource. I co-founded Brightside, which is a telemental health company. We take care of people with depression and anxiety, all kinds of mental health disorders. And so you can find me on Brightside as well. And I think that has been a really exciting venture to be able to meet people where they are, particularly in the time when they're stuck at not as easily able to access mental health care, and not as easily able to access it in person.
Well, thank you for doing that. I mean, that's the shadow pandemic of what's happening to us. And I really, hopefully that's the silver lining of what's happened, is that mental health is now just as important or as prioritized as physical health. So thank you for your work with Brightside. And again, thank you to Book Passage. And I know Cheryl's going to come back on, so we'll welcome Cheryl back. But Mimi, this was so fun.
So much fun.
I really enjoyed this book. Again, last time we're talking about speaking in thumbs, just a great exposition into human relations. And I think as now we're, connecting, we need connection more than ever. I would say this is such a great book in which to practice.
What I really hope readers can get from it is it's the kind of book where you can just pick it up and read one chapter and, get quite a lot from one chapter. And because it's filled with so many text messages, it's kind of like encountering the cartoons in the New Yorker. You get some ideas and then you get a cartoon. And so it's a fun and easy read. You can just curl up with it one night with a glass of wine and do that instead of going out on a bad date.
Last bonus question that just came in, and I'll make sure we can answer it before we turn it back to Cheryl. Generational differences. I'm mad at myself for not asking that question, since I work across generations all the time. Generational differences. Tell us anything quickly that you can about.
Absolutely. And I'm not sure I understand the text language of the 22-year-old, but my kids are really good at interpreting it for me. So yeah, and of course there are texts, and of course there are social norms, and of course there are cultural norms. So all of these, everything needs to be interpreted through the lens of who are you speaking with, and of where are they coming from, what's their cultural background, what age are they, and so not all rules apply across the board, and sensitivity to that is important. And language is evolving. It's live. Language is live. It changes every year. We get new words. You remember selfie was a new word. How many years ago? 10? I don't remember. But now, do we even think of it as a new word? No. And so, language is evolving, texting is evolving, and it will probably look very different 20 years from now, but we work with what we have for now.
Perfect. Thank you for that answer. Okay, Cheryl, I'll turn it to you.
Thank you so much. What an amazing hour. Here's the book. Can we see? I don't know if you can see it.
There it is. Yeah.
Yay. This is such an amazing book. Thank you, Eve. Thank you to Eve. Thank you to Mimi Winsberg. An incredible book. An important book too. I mean, this is really something that any corporation should buy for their staff members. Schools should definitely have it. I'm thinking high schools. I mean, this should be like required reading for, the sciences. So please, if you are out there and you are responsible for getting books to your students or to your employees, please give Book Passage a call. We would be happy to help you with these corporate orders. And individuals out there, you got to get this book. It's just amazing. So come to the store, call us, or go online, order the book. We have plenty in stock. We also have Eve's books also in stock, and they are ready. We can gift wrap, we can send them out. Come support Book Passage so we can continue providing these amazing programs right into your home. Thank you, everyone. Thank you to our wonderful authors. Good night. We will see you next time. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you.
you.